session. We got our cocktails ready to go. The simultanees. Tom Crawford back home. We're recording this almost at midnight Eastern time. For me, it's a little bit easier. It's almost 10 p.m. here in the Mountain Time Zone in Denver. But breaking down both victories by Michigan and Michigan State for the Spartans, we'll get to in a while. Wow, did the offense look markedly better? I mean, a 180, 100%. And we'll talk about the play calling, the tempo, Brad Salem, Brian Lewerke, Darrell Stewart, Elijah Collins, his coming out party. This was an enormous victory, in my opinion, for Michigan State. Mark D'Antonio threw down the gauntlet earlier in the week in his early week press conference, and the Spartans responded with a 51-17 drubbing of Western Michigan. They dominated in all phases. That will be part 2 of our Great Lakes Divide podcast here tonight, along with Tom Crawford. I'm Ryan Schuling. The music you hear coming in, going out, it's all provided by the Record Lounge in Rio Town, located in the Rio Town Marketplace, south on Washington from 496. Take a journey back through time. I just read a Rolling Stone article that said for the first time since 1986, vinyl sales have exceeded CD sales nationally. That is something, as Tom Crawford, you just heard laughing, but you go back to the 70s when Tom had a lot more hair and a lot more audio equipment at his dorm room at Michigan playing the vinyl. That's where you want to go. He and I were in the store. We were exploring. They have everything, all the good old stuff, the classics, all the new stuff coming out on vinyl. Every Friday, Heather Ferrari has it for you at the Record Lounge. But we start with Michigan and Army, and whoa and wow, a double overtime win for the Wolverines. To borrow an old saying from Jim Valvano, survive in advance, I guess. 24-21 the final. This had some eerily similar earmarks to the beginning of the game against Middle Tennessee State. Now, you might survive that against the Blue Raiders. You might survive that against the Black Knights. But Michigan's going into a bye week, and they go to Madison, and they take on a vaunted Wisconsin team that just curb stomped my alma mater, Central Michigan. So this needs to get cleaned up. We're going to start right there. I was tweeting at Tom at the beginning of this game, getting his thoughts on it. For the second straight week, on the first offensive possession by Michigan, Shea Patterson, quarterback, fumbles the ball away and gives the opposition a short field. First and foremost, I'll let you start it here, Tom. Your initial impressions, what I just described, the beginning of this game, Michigan trying to set a tone, take control. They didn't do it. What stood out to you?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me preface it on the idea that you can't. No team should ever apologize for a victory, and I feel like everybody was, Michigan fans were just out in a funk after for the turnovers, the 3 turnovers that we talked about, and just how they had to go into double OT to beat an armed services academy. But yeah, that was eerie. I mean, that was like, here we go again with a turnover. Now, one of those fumbles was not his fault. The second one, on a corner blitz, the running back did not pick up the block. I mean, that's Christian Turner didn't pick up his man. I mean, but you still got to tuck it away. And the thing of it is, Shea Patterson, Ryan, in that press conference following the Middle Tennessee State game, was so down on himself, he must have said, if he said it 5 times, he said it 15 times, I got to take care of the football. And it seems like he would have been focused on that, and he did not do that. And his overall game went beyond the turnovers. I know he had that rib injury that took place in the Middle Tennessee State game, but he just was not precise with his throws for the most part. Ronnie Bell bailed him out several times. Ronnie Bell had 7 grabs, and 3 or 4 of them were more catch than throw, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So he didn't have a good overall game at all, in my opinion.
Well, and I want to take you to something we discussed before we went to the podcast here, and that was the pregame discussion on the Fox panel show where former quarterback standouts, Brady Quinn from Notre Dame, Matt Leinart from USC, talked about their personal experiences and having that feeling of a guy looking over their shoulder, having that insecurity. in their job position that at any moment, if they made a mistake, they could be yanked out of the game, and that's a difficult circumstance within which to play, that you're afraid to take chances. You're afraid that you have zero margin for error. But the interesting counter to that was Urban Meyer, himself, of course, a former head coach. He had J.T. Barrett, Cardell Jones. They combined on a national championship. It can be done with two quarterbacks. And if Dylan McCaffrey is a guy who justifies playing time, this is what Urban Meyer said. You have a chart, and if he's on that top 10 list of offensive weapons, you're going to find a way to work him into the game, get him playing time, and that fear can be a good motivator. You don't want a quarterback to get fat cat syndrome. And we said this last week that Shea Patterson is a hard worker. He's not going to have that mentality, but there need to be repercussions, consequences for bad performances. So as you look at this, I'm not trying to drum up a quarterback controversy of any kind, Tom, but again, we see kind of an uneven performance from Patterson, especially out of the gate. What does this mean for the quarterback position going forward, particularly in a big, big game coming up in 2 weeks against Wisconsin?
Well, I think that's a strong possibility, Ryan. I mean, I listen to John Jansen when he does his halftime thing on WGR, or not WGR, but on the Michigan IMG broadcast with Jim Brandstetter and Dan Dierdorf. And he said at the start of the second half, and I agreed wholeheartedly, I thought just to kickstart that offense, why not put in Dylan McCaffrey? Jim Harbaugh has talked during the preseason. He talked after the Middle Tennessee State game that, hey, we have two quarterbacks here. I'm comfortable playing either one of them. So go do it. And I thought that was the optimum time. I mean, when you put the ball in the turf, I mean, his old coach, Bo Schembechler, somebody fumble, you're sitting your ass down. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just the way it is. And but that didn't happen. And, you know, I think Shea did struggle. There's no question about it. The defense won the game for him. There's no question about it.
And on that note, you mentioned Jim Harbaugh and the gem of a defensive performance that he describes in the following clip.
Yeah, I can talk about the defense and their play the entire game. That was a gem of a defensive performance. There's no doubt about it. Talk about the last play, the last series, just the entire football game. We made mistakes offensively, penalties and turnovers and turnovers on downs that the defense was not in the best positions, but played great. I mean, the interception on the goal line was huge. That was a big play in the game. Aidan Hutchinson sack last play of the game, huge, causing the turnover, and it was a really great play. Josh Uche, really had a great game. I mean, they may not show up on the stat line because there was a lot of times where he was knocking people back. Wasn't getting paid for it. Somebody else was making the tackle, but he was doing a great job. Kwity Paye, I thought, had an excellent game as well, and Carlo Kemp, had some big stops in the middle. This is Josh Ross fought. I mean, Josh Metellus played really well. There's a lot of guys that just played great. Don Brown did a great job preparing. Called a great game. Called a great play on the last. Great defense on the last play of the game, and got home, got the turnover, got the win.
And you're right, Tom. I think against this vaunted kind of triple option attack of Army, it's difficult to game plan for. We talked about Don Brown. What was he going to do? Army did total 243 yards, 200 of those on the ground, only 43 through the air. And in my opinion, Army's driving, I believe it was late in the first half, they do a play action pass that's intercepted. To me, I know this game went to overtime, but if Army scores a touchdown there, I mean, this game could have been very, very different.
Oh my! Two touchdowns in this game, Ryan. With this type of offense that attacks, with drive blocking, I think that would have been almost insurmountable when you think about it, because just their style of play. Lavert Hill. Yep. When we look back later on in the year, if Michigan has a special season, I'm not saying they are. I did at the initial. We'll see how that plays out. They will look back at this game as, wow, what if Lavert Hill didn't make that pick and they go down 14 in that situation? That would have really been problematic, to say the least.
And Lavert Hill with that interception, to me, absolutely crucial. I mean, Michigan's backs were against the wall. It was like watching if Michigan were Apollo Creed and Army were Rocky, and Apollo's getting drilled against the ropes, and finally he's able to recover. I'm talking Rocky 1 here, the one that Apollo actually won. That's where the Wolverines were, and Lavert Hill with that interception, 20-yard return, it turned the tables just enough, again, to keep Michigan kind of on even footing in this game. This was a war. I mean, pardon the expression, against a team like Army, our Armed Services Academy. But, Tom, you knew it coming in. You feared this game. You feared the style. And let's look at the numbers, how that breaks down. Zach Charbonnet, very inefficient. This reminded me of Connor Hayward for Michigan State a week ago. He had 33 carries and yet just a total of 100 yards. Averaging about 3 yards per carry, really had to work hard for those. And then the more concerning thing to me was not getting the passing game going with any level of efficiency, effectiveness, regularity, rhythm. Nico Collins only had 2 catches for 32 yards. Tariq Black only had 3 catches, 24 yards. You talk about Ronnie Bell, his emergence in the absence of DPJ. He did have those 7 catches for 81 yards. And this prompted a question from one of our colleagues, Nick Baumgartner, for Jim Harbaugh. And Jim had a little fun with the response. Here it is.
So you just decided to stick it out, keep it on the ground, though, the second? I mean, you preferred to...
Yeah, that was the play that was called. I mean, we could go every game with the, why didn't you pass when you ran and it didn't work, so you should have passed. We could do this for every game that's ever played in football. Oh, you passed, you should have run. So, listen to your podcasts. You seem to know a lot about football and baseball and basketball and every other game.
Okay.
So, come on. It's kind of low-hanging fruit, Nick.
So you can't win for losing. There's only so many ways you can attack this team like Army, which is such an outlier against any other opponent you're going to face this season. But let's talk about that for a moment with the attack formulated by Josh Gaddis, what you wanted to see from this offense, what you actually saw from this offense, and where your concerns are, Tom.
Well, back to the receiving core. Yeah, Ronnie Bell was the leading receiver. There was 9 guys that caught balls. Sean McEwen and Nico Collins, Nick Eubanks, Charbonnet, Daxton Hill, the freshman, Giles Jackson. So they spread it around a little bit. But you're right, there was no continuity. I didn't think they leveraged, in my opinion, the athleticism and the height and speed against the secondary of Army. Yet, that being said, I bring binoculars to the game, and I look at second and third levels on both sides of the ball, and I wasn't seeing Michigan's receivers having a good game in terms of getting separations. It wasn't totally on Shea. There was just not getting any gaps open. Ronnie Bell ran some really good routes. He got open, but that was part of the problem. But I want to go back real quickly, though. I know we did this woulda, shoulda, and Lavert Hill, but I'm telling you what, if Josh Metellus, they blow a whistle and it's Josh Metellus scoop and score,
yeah,
that's a whole different game right there.
Very true.
That was it was obviously a bad and you can't review it because if the play is blown dead, it's non-reviewable, right? But the play should not have been blown dead. That was a flat-out error by the official.
True. And
that really had impact on the game.
Another thing that had impact on the game, and again, if I'm an observer of Michigan and what concerns me, we talk about the initial Shea Patterson fumble, but there were 3 fumbles lost by Michigan in this game. And Tom, again, if this happens against Wisconsin, they will lose in Madison. What is the deal with ball security and Michigan right now?
I don't know. That's 5 fumbles. There was actually it was at 5 fumbles in lost fumbles, mind you, in the first 6 quarters of competition for the Michigan Wolverines.
Right.
And 2019, Ben Van Summeren, the young running back, he coughed one up. That's, you don't do that. And he didn't see the field after that. You can't do that. You can't turn the ball over. And against Wisconsin, it'll be hugely problematic. And Michigan didn't do this last year. They've already exceeded their fumble total, and they've lost a couple more as well that they retained. And then obviously getting Donovan Peoples-Jones might help the case because they've had 2 punt returners, drop punts.
Mm-hmm.
One was Lavert Hill, and then one last week, and then Ronnie Bell this week. So, yeah, I mean that's you can't do that. I don't care, who you're playing. If you're going to turn the ball over, you're just going to dig yourself a hole.
Tom, you made this comment before we started recording the podcast. I want you to expand on it a little bit and what we just watched with LSU against Texas, probably the biggest game in college football for, both opponents, quality of the opponents to this point in the season, and what you saw from LSU's quarterback versus what you would like to see from Shea Patterson, a senior, a guy that at least on the periphery had some dark horse Heisman talk attached to him.
Well, that was an absolute shootout in Austin tonight. And Joe Burrow, the quarterback for LSU, very competent. He's a transfer from Ohio State. And just when Texas came back and the score came within 6 points, instead of like doing what Jim Harbaugh typically does, is kind of run clock and do conservative aerial game, he's attacking down the field and takes his team down and scores a touchdown, as opposed to trying to preserve the victory. He went and captured the victory. Sam Ehlinger from Texas was terrific as well. 2 great quarterbacks going at it, an absolute classic. And in my estimation, Joe Burrow is what Shea Patterson we envisioned him to be this year. Now we're only 2 games in, and he did get the rib injury last week. I'm talking about Shea.
Yep.
So it's still out there for him, but that he epitomized what Michigan fans have wanted to see for decades, is go win the game, not try to preserve the game and try to just avoid disaster at the end. And they've typically been victimized in those situations.
Let's focus on Army just for a moment. This was a team that had a 10-game winning streak coming in, going back to last week's lackluster victory over Rice. But if you go back to last year, they lost their opener at Duke. Not a great loss, 20 points, 34-14. They took a number 5 rated college football playoff qualifying Oklahoma team on the road to overtime. So this was not a surprise. They won every game after that, including their bowl game against Houston, bigly, 70-14. So as you watched Army in this game, Tom, how good is this Black Knights team, really?
Well, I think they're good. I think they're more effective than they are good. I mean, they're effective because they bring an offense that nobody's used to dealing with. And so when you're quirky like that and you're a hard you're a hard prep for the opposition, you're leveraging an advantage. The other thing that Army has, as does Navy, as does Air Force, is you just have that foxhole never quit mentality. I mean, these guys are going to be battling overseas. I mean, a football game in their big picture is nothing to what they're going through as plebes, and the whole academy life. It's grueling. And so I think that's part of it. You're just dealing with really, really tough individuals who get stronger as the game goes on.
And Michigan, again, they knew they were going to be in for a fight in this game. Aidan Hutchinson knew that better than anybody. He's becoming a leader on this defense. And he talks about what it was like when he knew it was on the line.
Yeah, we knew the game was on the line. The offense kicked a field goal, so we knew if they scored, it's game. And I think we all came together, as one unit. As I said before the season started, this is a tight unit. Those are my brothers out there. So, we came together and we did what we do.
So there are character-building victories, lessons you can learn. You like to learn those in wins rather than losses. This is a win. They pull it out of the fire. They dodge a bullet on a 50-yard field goal attempt that went wide right. First of all, Tom, take me through what was going through your mind. What was your body position in the press box when that field goal was being lined up and attempted?
Well, my colleagues around me have gotten to know me over the years, and I tend to go to the I go get a glass of water, I go get water, I move around, I go to the restroom. But I was just taking this one sitting down, if you will, because I figured they had a chance to pull out, but I wasn't so much twisted up in the fact they might lose the game. I was just so focused on how are they playing this bad, in terms of execute. I mean, what's happening this year? The same thing what happened last year. I mean, last year had a great defense, and this defense is not as good as last year's defense, but the offense was an absolute train wreck today, I thought. I mean, and execution. And so I was more focused on – I wasn't even so much focused on the outcome as I was, and this team has got to get better, win or lose.
Army on the opening possession after that missed field goal in overtime scores a touchdown, and Michigan has to respond. They do. They get a quality drive. They tie the game up. They flip-flop positions on the very next one. Brief story for me. So I'm watching this game in Colorado, mind you, on Fox. It goes to double overtime, and what happens? They switch over to Colorado, Nebraska.
No.
I got Heidi'd. Remember the Heidi game between the Jets and Raiders?
Jets and the Raiders.
Yes.
And I was 12 years old back then.
Yeah.
I saw that live.
I couldn't believe it. There's nothing I could do. And so I'm searching through on my phone trying to find the end of this game. And by the time I got there, it was over. Michigan gets a field goal on their possession. They strip a sack Army. They get the fumble recovery. They get the win. And here's Kwity Paye commenting on that last play that sealed it for the Wolverines.
The last play, I just came off the ball. I seen it was a pass, so I tried to rip off the tackle. And once I seen him, I dove, get everything I had, and then somehow the ball came out, and I just jumped on it. Once I jumped on it, threw the position, and held it until they blew that whistle.
So 24-21 the final. Michigan
double
escapes
overtime, mind you.
with
Now,
the victory.
I want to add that also, Ryan, is the fact that that was the field goal, the missed field goal, or Michigan making a field goal and then they getting the fumble at the end was the second overtime. The first overtime is when the opposition scores first.
Yeah,
that's hard.
It is,
especially if you're the home team, because your crowd loses all of its air.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're in a scenario. Well, the best thing we can do is force an overtime, and that takes. So I give Michigan a lot of credit that they matched the touchdown thing, and it was a pretty big catch by Ronnie Bell that made that happen.
So after all that, deep breath, Tom Crawford, pacing in the press box. You had water. I'm assuming you'd rather have whiskey. I know I would have in your shoes at
they
that
gotta have
moment.
alcohol in college stadiums these days. This is ridiculous.
I mean, just for this alone. But, I was kind of tweaking at you. And I'm telling you, the last podcast we done, Appalachian State, and this was playing out a lot like that game, yet Michigan pulls it out. They get the win. That's all that matters. It's double overtime. Like you said, week 10, looking back, it won't matter that this game went 2 overtimes and they only won by 3, 24-21. But what is the takeaway? What is the lesson from Michigan from this game? How does it help them going forward, if at all?
Well, they're certainly not going to be overconfident. That's for sure. And I'm also, in talking to the players, I talked to several of them, there is a succinct brotherhood between the offense and defense and the entire personnel on this team. So I don't think there's any dissension. I mean, they're 2-0, and I think they know they have a lot of work to do. They got a lot of cleaning up to do from mistakes. And fortunately, they have 2 weeks to prepare for it. Wisconsin also has 2 weeks to prepare for it.
Yep.
It's like these two, this big classic game coming on has a 2-week, window of hype, if you will, and no fear of anybody losing heading in. I'm projecting College Game Day will be there. I just have that hunch in Madison, and it's going to be a heck of a game. I think Michigan is going to play a lot better than they did these first 2 outings in terms of taking care of the football.
Yeah.
And I also think that the adaptation to this speed and space RPO type offense will evolve over time.
Scale of 1 to 10. How concerned are you in the meantime between now and Madison about 1, Shea Patterson, and 2, the offensive line, which didn't do a whole lot in getting push and opening holes for Zach Charbonnet in the running game?
Well, the good news is that John Runyon Jr. is going to be back at a left tackle for the Wisconsin game. He dressed and he could have played, so that will be good to get him back in there. So I think they'll get better. I know there was a lot of frustration, and it wasn't the offensive line. It wasn't just missed blocks. I mean, there were some costly penalties. They committed 9 penalties. 9 penalties is way too much. They had 8 last week. I mean, Michigan State had 14 the last week, and that's really bad. Mm-hmm. You just can't. You cannot penalize yourself like that. And I think it's going to be a crisper, cleaner game, much like Michigan State cleaned up their game from week number 1 to week number 2. I guess for Michigan, the biggest progress is from week number 2 or game number 2 to game number 3.
So your concern level, scale of 1 to 10? 10 being total panic, 1 being not worried at all.
I'd say about a 7.
So you're pretty concerned.
I'm concerned. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a sports concerned. I mean, there's bigger concerns in life than a college football team.
Obviously.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that I'm almost more surprised than concerned. I'm surprised that I have this concern, that we're in this concerned state.
Yeah, there you go.
I thought they would play a lot crisper today. Even though they had explosiveness against Middle Tennessee State, I thought they'd be a crisper team today, and they certainly weren't.
And your concern level for Patterson himself?
Well, I'm not concerned about the position, because I think whoever survives that battle, and we'll even throw Joe Milton in there. I mean, that's sure. Harbaugh keeps talking about that. I think they're going to be fine at quarterback, because I think Jim's going to realize he's going to have to put somebody in there who's going to produce and not hurt his team.
Any other comments from players, thoughts on this game that stand out to you that we haven't covered?
I just think that there's more confidence in the team than there is in the fan base.
True.
Because they know it's fixable, and fans take so much ownership. I mean, there was another meltdown on the affiliation thing. I'm with the Wolverine.com. I mean, they think the season's over with. They're 2-0. Nothing good came out of this game. Hey, there's always something good comes out of a game. You know, you learn, and they'll get better. They got a lot of young players. I'm not cocky by any stretch, but I think there's reason for expectation that things will get better.
So 24-21, Michigan escapes against Army in double overtime. As Tom and I talked about, they'll have the bye week. This could not come, I don't think, at a better time. The Wolverines need it, the extra prep time. A vaunted Wisconsin team, a serious, I think, playoff contender, both sides of the ball, strong running game, tremendous offensive line, effective defense. They were dominant against Central Michigan today, one of the directional Michigan schools. We'll talk about another in Western Michigan as they went up against the Michigan State Spartans in just a moment. But we want to remind you that the sponsor of the Great Lakes Divide podcast with Tom Crawford and yours truly, Ryan Schuling, is the Record Lounge in Rio Town and our good friend Heather Frary. New releases of music every Friday. You'll hear them each and every week on this very podcast, coming into and going out of our pods. The music is a character in and of itself on this program. We want you to enjoy it, and we want you to check out the Record Lounge. They not only have the widest and greatest selection of vinyl in Lansing. As I mentioned earlier, vinyl sales now exceed CD sales for the first time since 1986. Collectors are at peak interest levels, and there's equipment there. High-fidelity stereos, old-fashioned phonographs, things that go by an engineer that Heather makes sure works to 100% efficiency, effectiveness, and quality. If you ever have a problem, you can check in with her personally, and she will place orders for you. If they don't have it in stock, she will get it for you within 24 to 48 hours. One of the best people I've ever met in any business, totally dedicated to customer service, and you can find her in the Rio Town Marketplace. That's south on Washington from 496 in Lansing, the Record Lounge in Rio Town. And now we turn our attention to the Spartans. And as much concern and clinching as the Wolverines fans were doing in their nerve-wracking win over Army, that was not the case in East Lansing today. And this was a night and day performance from the Michigan State offense. Brian Lewerke was sharp. He was on target. He was on point. The tempo was increased. It was consistent. I love the play calling by Brad Salem. It was misdirection. It was some deception. It was relying upon a very solid running game. We heard from Mark D'Antonio earlier the week on two things that stood out, and Tom and I talked about this on Wednesday. One, calling out the offense as a whole. They didn't execute. They didn't perform. They weren't physical. I mean, across the board, he basically put them on blast. And he said Elijah Collins stood out, was going to get more touches, and holy man, did he respond. 17 carries, 192 yards. He averaged over 11 yards per carry. Connor Hayward only had 3 carries in this game. He fumbled and lost the ball. That didn't help his job security at all. Ladarius Jefferson was a touchdown vulture. He had 5 carries for 9 yards, but scored twice. at the goal line. Stealing those, you might say, from Elijah Collins. But, Tom, you and I were texting during this game, and I want to start right there. It appears Michigan State has found their bell cow running back, their Le'Veon Bell, their Jeremy Langford, their Javon Ringer, and his name is Elijah Collins. Wow, was he impressive.
Yeah, Ryan, Elijah Collins they got a running back. Michigan State has got a running back, and with that running back, they have balance, because let's not forget. Let's just not talk about Elijah Collins. Let's talk about Darrell Stewart Jr. 10 catches, 185 yards. I mean, when you have a dual threat like this between the run and the pass, balance. I'm a huge guy on balance. That's where that arsenal, one fed just the other, then play action comes into place. Michigan State with Brian Lewerke was just playing with Western Michigan. They could have scored 70 points if they wanted to. It's the ironic part is their defense had some lapses, which that's still good anyway. So this was a big night for Michigan State. Even though you're beating a MAC team, they needed this, and it just shows you when you can have a fire and brimstone speech from the head coach, who doesn't necessarily do that all the time. And not only did he direct it at his team and half of his team, specifically his offense, he also directed it as coaching staff, and they all reacted in a positive way.
I think Brad Salem had a tremendous game calling plays. They were mixing it up. They were balanced, as you said, on offense. I think they were unpredictable in a lot of ways, and they took advantage of what we were talking about during the last two podcasts, which is the offensive line. It's not going to be great. At best, it's going to be adequate. So what do? 3-step drops, quick looks, slants, swing passes, quick hitters. They did all of that. 582 yards of offense. Brian Lewerke, very efficient through the air, over 70% completion rate, 314 yards. As Tom pointed out, most of those to goal line stew. You had two offensive performers who really stood out in this game, in Stewart and Collins, and you got to give credit to Lewerke as well. And I'll give credit to the offensive line for what they were asked to do. They were able to protect Lewerke and give him time. And the one interception he threw, he did face pressure. There was a blindside blitz that was unblocked, and I think that was largely to blame for what happened. He forced a throw. It was an interception, but it's not like this offense shot themselves in the foot a whole lot in this game. Tom, they were 7 of 10 on third down conversions. Some of those came in the red zone, led to touchdowns instead of field goals. And to get to 51 points, I couldn't agree with you more. I know it was Western Michigan. I know it's a MAC defense that's generally undersized and under speed, but they had to have something like this just for their confidence, their psychology going forward from here. I think this was a turning point moment, perhaps, in the season on offense for Michigan State. What say you?
Yeah, when you got the Wisconsin and Ohio State in October and all, you got the challenges like we've talked about against Northwestern and Arizona State coming to town. I mean, that was a team that beat them. That's all. I mean, it's so important that the offense got in sync. And I just thought, regardless who they're playing today, what I saw, and I watched pretty much the entire game on one of my screens here at Crawford Indoor, they were really crisp offensively. And the energy and the authority and the leadership that Brian Lewerke showed out there, I think it fed off on the other players. And Darrell Stewart, my God, was unbelievable.
And that's kind of surprising to me. I want to get your thoughts on this because with the loss of Felton Davis last year, and of course we knew he was not coming back this season, it appeared to me that Cody White would be the heir apparent. Now, he had some catches, 5 for 63. He had a touchdown, a very nice one, to say the least. But it's becoming clearer and clearer that the guy that has the best chemistry, connection, kind of that sixth sense, if you will, with Brian Lewerke is Darrell Stewart Jr., whether it be route running, the accuracy of passes, hitting him in the hands. He had a couple drops. But again, like you said, 185-yard performance. What is it that stands out to you about this combo, Lewerke to Stewart?
Well, I think part of it. Let me go back to what you're talking about. With Cody White, I think you need both of them. I think both of them help each other, and I don't think it's just Lewerke's going to be this is his guy. I think he needs two really good guys. I think he needs Dotson as a tight end to be able to throw to. I think that's key. But Stewart he's a gazelle out there. I mean, he's long. I mean, I think he's got a tremendous upside as a potential NFL receiver, and he seems to. Man, he was toying with that Western secondary tonight, absolutely.
And in reverse, if you look at that red zone play that they call, which I loved from Brad Salem. When Michigan State's at its best, they're calling little giants. They're getting creative. They're getting a little weird. They're getting a little wacky. They're busting out the hijinks, the tomfoolery, and the shenanigans. D. Stu throws a completion to Brian Lewerke down the right sideline. Yeah. That's how good this combination is, Tom. It works in reverse.
Well, what that play ignited the whole team. I mean, it was just a reaction. I mean, Lewerke's jumping up and down. I mean, I think Michigan State, that play epitomized how much fun they were having tonight offensively. They were just letting it fly. They all got called on the carpet midway. I'm sure practice was pure hell for that offense. And I think they were just enjoying the moment and having some fun. That's when college football is fun, when you have plays like that.
Jake Hartbarger, for his part, only punted once in this game, and it was late. It was during garbage time when this game was decided and Michigan State had thrown in the reserves. Rocky Lombardi got a little bit of time under center, although he didn't throw a single pass. He was handing it off. But Coughlin was his usual solid self. He made all 3 field goals he attempted, all 6 extra points. Continues to be a weapon in every sense of that word. So Michigan State, the performance, I mean, last week we were talking against Tulsa, Tom, about, hey, it's the defense, it's carrying, the offense has to match up. But tonight, it was the offense that set the tone. And we're talking about, time of possession. We're talking about not giving the ball away in short yardage situations on bad turnovers, with the exception of that one Lewerke interception. We're talking about a couple of takeaways in the red zone. Western Michigan missed 2 field goals. John Wasink, I believe, threw 2 red zone interceptions. This might have been a different game had those tables turned differently, but Michigan State made the big plays when they had to, when it mattered most.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm talking about the defense. I mean, it was kind of a role reversal about who performed better, obviously, relative, to what happened against Tulsa. But that defense is solid, and they'll shore up those issues of Western. Kind of got into a little bit of a flow there, and there were some missed opportunities. They wouldn't have won the game. We know that, but the score could have been a heck of a lot more respectable with a couple field goals here and a couple touchdowns there. It wouldn't have been such a one-sided defeat for the Broncos.
Tom, one other thing that obviously stands out to anybody who watched last week's game and then this week's game. Last week for Michigan State, 14 penalties for 122 yards. They had more penalty yardage than rushing yardage. Tonight's game, they only had 2 penalties against them. I mean, can you imagine what happened in practice this week after D'Antonio, what he said during his weekly press conference, and then when they went to work, and in this game against Western Michigan, the execution, the lack of mistakes, just 2 penalties for 20 yards. What stands out to you about that crispness, about that performance?
Well, they say that, most teams are supposed to improve from week number 1 to week number 2. I think when you combine just that whole situation of week number 1 to week number 2 with the fact that their coach, Mark D'Antonio, gave this kind of a little beyond what he normally does, calling his team out in public as he did with this snarl on his face for a good 30 minutes on Tuesday, including his staff, which he's, he didn't fire anybody after last year, and he moved the chairs around the Titanic, as we keep referring to. But he called them out, and they delivered. I mean, everybody delivered. When you go from 14 penalties down to 2, that's precision, that's focus, that's concentration. That's a good thing for Michigan State. I mean, this was probably one of the most important wins over a MAC team, as in one of the directional schools that Michigan State has beaten up as an Eastern, Central, or Western, that I can recall in terms of reigniting a season that after week number 1, people are wondering about.
And maybe this is just an adjustment, a learning curve. You talk about the improvement from week 1 to week 2, but there are different wrinkles in how these games are being called. And we talked about this in the last podcast. Instead of Dave Warner being up in the booth and they're communicating down to the sideline, they're running plays in and out there, Brad Salem is on the sideline. He's running the plays in directly. They're going up tempo. And that was the 2 things that stood out to me. One, the time between plays, keeping Western Michigan off balance, and then the time during plays, Tom. And I mentioned this as we started our conversation on Michigan State. There weren't, 5-step drops, rollout reads by Lewerke. This was quick step back, quick read over the middle, hit your target, maybe make one check down. There just wasn't a lot of variation from Lewerke in the pocket. They kept it simple in that regard. And to me, I almost think that has to be the case going forward. If this offense is going to do what it did today, and granted, Northwestern isn't Western Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio State, all the way down the line, it's not going to be the same. But this is the type, the style, the tempo of offense that the Spartans have to run. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. The tempo, the biggest takeaway from today was the tempo. I mean, it had flow, their offense, and it had organization, and it looked like there wasn't any confusion on the sidelines or hesitation. And obviously, we saw the precision. So I think that this was a big breakthrough in that. Now, when you go against Wisconsin, Ohio State, I mean, that things could change. I mean, it's weird how that works. Who you play has a lot to do with it. But at least I think they're putting themselves in a better position to have a more fighting chance in those two tough road games in October.
Let's look at this briefly from Tim Lester's perspective in Western Michigan and what they tried to do from the outset, which is, you can only do so much with a game plan, your play calling. But what was obvious to me was they knew Michigan State might have the best run defense in America.
Yeah.
Levante Bellamy was held to a very pedestrian 44 yards on 15 carries. That's below 3 yards a carry. They weren't going to run the ball. They came out trying a little bit of tempo, trying to attack the Michigan State secondary. They moved the football, but they made mistakes. They shot themselves in the foot. And in a game like this on the road for a MAC team like Western Michigan, you can't afford to have the mistakes they made, the missed field goals they had, the missed red zone opportunities they had. But for Western Michigan, what they tried to do, is there a type of template that another Michigan State opponent could follow based on what the Broncos did?
Yeah, I think attack the secondary. Basically, in the flats, maybe those post corner type of routes. Maybe 15 and beyond. There's some gaps in there. I don't know. I don't see the whole field when I'm watching on television.
Right.
But I think tempo is one of those things. One thing is you're not going to run. You're not going to be conservative against Michigan State and run between the tackles and even have a conservative passing game. You're going to have to penetrate them deep, and I think that's what Western did. I mean, Western did that out of desperation. I mean, I don't think they really thought they at any time they could establish any kind of running game where they thought they would get 125, 150 yards. You can't do it. The front seven that Michigan State has is probably the best front seven in the entire country.
And I want to talk one last thing here before we kind of go to wrap things up on the running game for Michigan State and the distribution of carries and how interesting this was. Normally, historically, for Mark D'Antonio during his entire tenure at Michigan State, he rewards older players, experienced players, juniors and seniors, guys that have experience. What happened tonight, freshman Elijah Collins, 17 carries, 192 yards. Anthony Williams Jr., another freshman, had the second most carries with 6. Connor Hayward, just 3 carries. Ladarius Jefferson, a guy we thought may be part of a 1-2 punch with Hayward, he only had 5 carries, and 2 of those were goal line carries for touchdowns. Is this the formula going forward, Tom? And has Mark D'Antonio, has Brad Salem, have they kind of figured out the magic elixir, if you will, that maybe youth should be served, and perhaps Collins and Williams are the 1-2 punch and not Hayward Jefferson that we might look forward to as the season progresses?
Well, keep in mind with Elijah Collins, I mean, he's a redshirt freshman.
Right.
And he played in 4 games. They did that. You know how that maximum thing you can play 4 and
the
still
new rule. Yeah, yep.
And so he's a second-year guy, just like Ladarius Jefferson. I mean, the guy, I'm sure he's producing in practice, but he admitted in the post-game interview he needs to work on his blocking more. So I think he recognizes that he's got a lot of work to do. But I look at second-year guys as not kind of semi-veterans, if you will. So that part didn't surprise me at all, to be quite honest with you.
Well, you just mentioned that. I'm glad you brought that up, Tom, because I believe, I'm trying to think back now because we just watched the game, that it was Elijah Collins at running back who picked up a potential blitzer that allowed Brian Lewerke to complete a pass. I want to say it was to Stewart for a touchdown.
That's true. You're exactly right. Yep.
And that's big. And like we said, I think that's one of the things that pissed Mark D'Antonio off the most. And we're not just talking about this season, but last season. And you could throw L.J. Scott into that equation, is that the running backs did not do their job in pass pro, in the fact that you have to be reliable in that sense that when the offensive line is trying to block, protect, create a pocket for Brian Lewerke, there could be that odd man rush coming, and it's up to the running back to pick up that blitz, even if it's just a chip block, to buy a second or two. And
Right.
Tom, as we saw, that can make all the difference in the world.
Oh, absolutely. Just even if he could rotate to a sidestep, a Tom Brady type sidestep to buy some time in the pocket, just a little. Absolutely, anything to just buy your quarterback more time is so important. And so, hey, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. And I saw all the tweets tonight. Everybody, hey, they found themselves a running back. Everybody was going crazy over this thing. We'll see how that goes forward, but at least it looks like a formidable candidate that looks like a running back, and he's a downhill runner, and he shows some great speed on those breakaways.
They'll have one more test before conference action opens up against Northwestern on the road in a couple of weeks, and that'll be another home test, a team that beat them last year, Herm Edwards and Arizona State, coming to East Lansing. That's a 4 o'clock Eastern start on Fox. Tom and I will have much more on that game as we have our midweek podcast coming up in just a few days. Michigan will be on the bye week, so we'll kind of break that down. Tom, will you be going down to Ann Arbor to have a conversation with Jim Harbaugh and all them?
Yeah, I'm going to be getting some sound bites this week.
Okay.
If I'm not going to be there, I got somebody getting it for me. But It's going to be interesting. Actually, this is going to be kind of weird this week, Ryan, because this is a bye week when coaches go on
recruiting trips.
Go on recruiting. Yeah. And this is an early bye week, so I don't even know if he's going to have a presser on Monday. Typically they don't, but when it does, we'll get some stuff down there for midweek and get his reaction, because I think there's a lot more questions that need to be answered about this team.
No doubt about it. And for the Wolverines, it gets real tough real quick on the road against currently 17th ranked Wisconsin. You figure they're going to go up in the polls after their shellacking of Central Michigan today. That'll be a noon start on Fox. It's in 2 weeks. So again, Tom will have some kind of interim coverage of the Wolverines as we break it down in our podcast coming up midweek. We remind you to download, subscribe, your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening to us right now online, we appreciate you. GreatLakesDivide.squarespace.com. Follow us on Twitter at GLDivide. You can follow us on Facebook. Same thing. Podcasts are posted. And if you subscribe, they'll automatically download to your phone. You can listen to them throughout. Always want to give the Jerry Springer final thought to Tom. Just looking back on the action today, both Michigan and Michigan State, how would you summarize it, Tom?
Promising for Michigan State and a lot of work to do for Michigan, but it could change any week. I mean, everything, the whole narrative changes every week. A team that looked bad last week turns it around. BYU lost last week, but then I think they beat Tennessee this week, so now they're all happy. So,
how bad are things for Tennessee? By the way, they're 0-2.
Oh my God, their fans looked like they were in meltdown mode. It's and that's a proud program that has been sputtering now for a decade.
And you can imagine then, Tom, if that field goal had been made by Army and what Michigan fans would have looked like had the Wolverines
my God.
lost.
It would have been bad. I mean, there's a big difference between winning and losing. Let's be real. Because it could be forgotten. Just ask Oklahoma fans about that.
There it is. And it was almost the exact same game, and it was the same outcome. The favorite wins it. And for Wolverines fans, they can take a deep breath. They get a week to rest, and then it's on. It's on to Wisconsin and Madison. Are you going to go to that game, Tom? You going to make an effort?
No, I'm going to be out in Western Pennsylvania. My son coaches at Allegheny College. It's the one opportunity I'm going to see him.
Yep.
So I will not be up in Whiskey. But let me tell you something about that Wisconsin game. If Michigan somehow pulls that game off, they'll probably be underdogs.
Yep.
All that Army stuff is forgotten just like that. That's the fickle finger of football.
No doubt about it. We'll be back midweek with more on that matchup. And, of course, Michigan State welcoming him in Arizona State as well. For Tom Crawford, I'm Ryan Schuling. That'll do it for us from here for now. The sounds you hear as we go out are brought to you by the Record Lounge in Reotown. Every song that you hear on this podcast, you can find on vinyl at the Record Lounge in the Reotown Marketplace. It's on South Washington. You just go south from I-496. It's right there. You can turn left, take some parking. Heather Ferrari, her whole staff will be there to help you. They have vintage stereo equipment as well. It's up to snuff. They check it through an engineer. All you could ever want on vinyl. It is the place to go, not only in Lansing, not only in mid-Michigan, but statewide. I got to tell you, it's top-of-the-line merchandise, and we thank Heather Ferrari and the Record Lounge for their support of the Great Lakes Divide podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you midweek, and we hope you enjoyed the games today. Goodbye, everybody.
If I could see just how lonely my